Hello, 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 America. Welcome to American Awakenings, Sign of Life, daily live stream and podcast. We're here, middle of Holy Week, special week for all of us. Right in the middle of the Corona crisis, it takes on special significance for all of us. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to have a special guest from Nashville, Jenn Bostic. So excited to have Jenn with us. And our good friend Dan Haseltine will be with us as well as usual. Great to have them here. First, we're going to kick ourselves off with a little bit of worship music with our friend Josh Jacob. Josh, friend, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, I got some John Mark McMillan, is one of my favorite artists, and who made it cool for me to just do worship, accessible for me, This is Sins Are Stones. All our sins are stones at the bottom of your oceans, and all our guilty stains have been washed away by the blood of the Son. I have overcome the grave. By the blood of the Son, I have overcome the grave. The grave. Recompense is made for the guilty and the shame, for eternity is gained in the arms of the slain. By the blood of the Son, I have overcome the grave. By the blood of the Son, I have overcome the grave. The grave, though my soul praise Him, oh my soul, oh my soul praise Him, oh my soul, oh my soul, oh my soul, oh my soul, oh my soul. Recompense is made for the guilty and the shamed, for eternity is gained in the arms of the slain.
That's good.
Thank you, Josh.
What's up, Josh?
So good. And thanks so much, brother. Really appreciate that. It's so good to be with you all. All of you are tuning in live, and those of us who listen to us on podcast. Now, we've got a little bit of a timing conundrum that we face because we're here one day via live stream and then a day later versus podcast. So we're kind of there. We're going to split the difference a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the Holy Week cycle and Maundy Thursday, and just talk about that cycle of, we talked about it before, even earlier this week, about the idea of all of life is a arc from life, which is so wonderful, God-given, into the path of descent, into death, and then life again. That's really hard. We all know how hard that is. We uniquely know how hard that is in this season. And we want to honor that today with some of our time together and some of our discussion together. We want you to know we're there for you. We're praying for you. We're praying for you every day. We're thinking about you every day. And now, from Gainesville, Florida, our first word, Mr. Daily Dose himself, Pastor Joel.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you and talk to you. We're talking this week about spiritual disciplines, about rhythms, about things that we do in our lives that connect us to God and to one another, and alluding even to what John said about special weeks, special times. There's one part of a spiritual discipline that I want to talk briefly about today, which is solitude. A lot of the great spiritual masters, if you will, over the centuries have talked about this idea of being alone. But ultimately, if we really boil it down, I think a lot of us are really terrified of being alone. And perhaps in some of the most intense ways you've ever experienced right now, you're having to be alone. And the thing about our current time is that we can mindlessly fill the gaps and the voids with whatever kind of just scrolls into view. And that's a real temptation. There's no shortage of things that can scroll into our view, right? But what if there is not the only choice of being lonely or feeling mindlessly? What if there is a way to be alone and to experience solitude that actually is good for our souls? Richard Foster, in his book, Celebration of Discipline, says this: we can cultivate an inner solitude and silence that sets us free from loneliness and fear. Loneliness is inner emptiness, he says. Solitude is inner fulfillment. I want to say that again. Loneliness is inner emptiness. Solitude is inner fulfillment. And so there's this way in which we can learn to be alone with God and with ourselves that actually fills us up and gives us life, as opposed to making us scared and feeling lonely. Jeff Bethke here on the podcast talked about that last week, about allowing everything around us to go quiet and experiencing God's presence and letting that be enough, and actually needing to get quiet for a long enough period of time to experience that. But also, one little tidbit I'd like to share today is the idea of how we get quiet and where we get quiet. Jesus in the Bible goes off to lonely, desolate places, is what the Greek word alludes to there. And his whole purpose is to get alone with God. It's not necessarily the idea of comfort, although I'm sure many of us have our comfortable chair, our spot. The point here in true silence and solitude with God, though, is an invitation to listen and to be alone with God, to hear and see God, and to believe that it's not just about simply ceasing noise and activity, but actually trying to hear God. And so as we go deeper in solitude and silence, I believe we will discover, and I have discovered in my own life, that this is just a beautiful place where we can begin to strip away who we think we are and allow God to speak to us about who he really has made us. And as we close our mouths and we quiet our minds, a lot of things begin to fall away, and we're left simply in the presence of a loving God. And that's enough. And that's my encouragement for today, is learn how to be in solitude, to be alone with God, and let him be enough for you during this time. That's the Daily Dose. Back to you, John.
Thanks, Joel. Really appreciate that. Lots of stripping away happening in this season for all of us. And that's a good word, ways to embrace it. A hard word, but a good word. So thank you for sharing that with us. Jeff Bethke this morning in Maui. Good to see your smiling face. As always, Jeff.
That's right. Good to see you guys. Hopefully, sorry about the fail for anyone watching where I got the internet booted me off at the end of the show yesterday. I want to talk about today, the something to chew on. I want to talk about United Flight 232. I think it was 1989. And why is because that's actually one of the most famous plane crashes of all time. The topic I want to chat about is vulnerability and strength in vulnerability, and why it has to do with that plane crash. You can go research it when you have more time, because I won't be able to expound on it over too long in just a couple minutes. But what's really famous about that crash is there was still some casualties, but that is actually considered one of the most successful survivors and plane crashes of all time. In regards to, it was seen as an impossible flight and an impossible landing. Like, what actually happened? They lost hydraulics on that flight, and no commercial flight had ever landed successfully or ever had any survivors when landing without hydraulics. But yet, this plane and this crash, I think over like 100 and something survivors were able to happen. And it's seen and actually taught in flight schools now, specifically with how the pilots dealt with the crash and dealt with the 30 to 45 minutes before the crash in regards to planning the landing. A couple things stand out. What they found is crazy about this crash, but when they look at the transcript, what really stood out to a lot of researchers was the amount of vulnerability the pilots had with each other. Almost all pilots, when there's a crisis or when there's a crash about to happen, go into kind of this takeover mode, I know what I'm doing, I'm the captain, you just be quiet, or something like that. And that comes up a lot in transcripts. But when you read the transcript from United Flight 232, you see an immense amount of vulnerability and humility you never have seen in a cockpit in this fashion, in regards to the entire crew, the entire cockpit, basically having that perfect tension between being vulnerable with, I need your help, I can't do this alone, we need to work together, while also still having the leadership of, but I also am an expert and a professional and I know what I'm doing. And there was a crazy bonus too on that flight where there was actually someone as a passenger was actually trained on how to land this exact plane. Like, he actually taught other pilots how to land this exact plane in crisis mode. And so they called him up, and even him came up forward rather than taking over, because he's actually more trained than anyone else. And his first thing out of his mouth on the transcript was, what can I do to help? So there was this circular nature between all three pilots of humility and vulnerability. Like, I need your help, we've never done this before, that actually all researchers looking back say that is what landed the plane and had survivors. And what's crazy too is they simulated the crash. They let other expert pilots get in the simulator after the crash and redo the exact same problem, the exact same thing. 28 times they did this, all 28 times, no survivors. The plane just basically blew up. And so it was just an impossible landing. And the lesson, and if you go Google it, the transcript is just a beautiful dance of humility and vulnerability. And I've always thought of that crash in regards to crisis and in regards to moments. A lot of us kick into gear in crisis that isn't healthy, that isn't always the best. But that crash and the transcript of those pilots is such a beautiful example of when you actually lean into humility and vulnerability in crisis, and you allow others to come into that moment and you ask for help, it creates this circular nature of relationship, of blessing and beautifulness that actually can take you farther than you could have gone alone. Because if one of those pilots would have just said, I could do it, it probably wouldn't have had any survivors. And so that's my encouragement for you today. Go read the transcript. It's a fascinating case study on what that looks like to, as a team, work together, as a team, ask for help, and as a team, be vulnerable. And I think that'll be an encouragement for you today.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. So strong, so strong. I'm going to pick up on that theme in a moment here. Basically, we did a prayer call this morning, which was led by Pastor Joel. And Pastor Joel took us down a path of the Ark of Lament season in Easter is one of celebration, if you will. Weird word, I know. Celebration of sorrow. There is sorrow in this season. We have to fully acknowledge the fact that that's the path that our Lord went down. That's because Joel led us that way. Humility and vulnerability. I asked my boss, Marisa, if we could do a little bit of a audible on this call, and because she's such a generous spirited person, she allowed me to do that. and we're going to spend a little time now on the subject of that season of sorrow that we're in, which is one that we're all experiencing generally, but it's also marked in the Christian calendar so profoundly. And so the entry point, and I'm going to have Joel in a second here do the frame up of of Maundy Thursday and the Last Supper. All right, wait, let's quick go over to can I get the Last Supper up on the screen there? There we go.
The Zoom Last Supper.
Digital Last Supper.
Yeah, that's a little bit too familiar for all of us right now. But you know, we were going through and praying for people that were standing in the gap with. We had the cycle of one of our teammates who's in the hospital having a baby today, which is wonderful. That's joyous, right? Shout out to you, Daryl and Siobhan out there. And then we talked about stories that were devastating, stories of friends in the ICU. Marisa shared that, and friends that are in deep depressions as they sort of face sort of the breaking of their dreams. At least they think they're breaking their dreams forever. They're going to be returned to them. They will be. We believe that, but it doesn't feel that way in the moment. And one of our teammates shared about a story about this 13-year-old young lady, Christine. Let's see what's the spelling here. Pidgey, I believe, in Colorado. I hope I've got the pronunciation right, but she was a young epileptic girl that was on the front end of a nationwide movement that opened up, new treatments, to folks. And our friend was sharing in great sadness. She passed yesterday, not due to the epilepsy, the 13-year-old young lady, due to the COVID-19. And then our friend Dan was just commenting a moment ago about the loss of a hero of one of his boys, John Prine in Nashville. We'll get back to that in a minute. So the whole thing is hard, right? It's hard. We're feeling it. 1,800 people died yesterday. There's good news out there. We're gonna get past this soon enough. But right now it's hard on hard on hard. But that's the hard our Lord faced too. And Joel, can you frame up the Maundy Thursday experience for us?
Yeah, for sure. And so for those who maybe are not familiar with that phrase, Maundy Thursday, it's part of the liturgical or church calendar. And it points us to the idea of the Last Supper and the idea of just before Jesus was to go be crucified, he wanted to share in the Passover meal with his disciples. And so as we think about it today, as we frame even this conversation, John and friends, I think there's a sense in which one of the most agonizing and yet also beautiful parts of the story of Holy Week is this idea of Jesus being with his disciples, with his friends on the night that he would, number one, be betrayed by one of them. But as he washes their feet and just has this intimate time of closeness with them, of course, there's sadness, there's confusion, there's misunderstanding. Some of them have no idea. Most of them basically have no idea what's really going on. But Jesus is there knowing he's going to face his death. And he says, let's share a meal together. Let me wash your feet. Let me serve you. And it's that final time before he's going to go to the cross that he spends with his disciples. So just a little framing for what it is that we're celebrating or in a strange way, as John said, sharing in and remembering that part of this Holy Week.
Well, then the next step was, of course, and just to finish the arc of it so we can all get the whole framework, he goes off to the garden with his friends. Perhaps one of the most painful stories in the entire Bible, at least for me, where he's there with his friends in the darkest hour of all of human history, perhaps, where he's going to have to walk down to the path of death and to prevail upon the gates of hell. And he says, hey, friends, stay up with me. I'm lonely here, right? And his friends fall asleep. And then he says, hey, guys, you fell asleep on me. They fall asleep again. And just thinking about that path, that walk. I mean, it's a walk that I'm sure many of you are feeling right now in some form or fashion. The walk of, God, I really don't want to go down this path. I wish there were an easier path. Can you take me there? So that's the moment that I wanted to enter into this with my friends here on the line and on the pod, and see if that strikes up. And if you kick it over to you, Dan, you were really saying some really touching things about John a few minutes ago.
Yeah, we are here in Nashville. It feels a little bit like there's been kind of this blanket that has just been laid on top of the entire city. We all found out that just the great, wonderful singer-songwriter John Prine passed away due to COVID-19 last night, and we've all been pulling for him. We've all been praying for him and his family, Fiona, his wife, and just wanting just wanting an outcome that kept John with us for a little bit longer. And for me, it was sad. My son came into the room last night, and he'd heard about it first and said, he just looked up at me and he said, "Dad, guess what? John Prine died." And John was one of my son's heroes, is one of my son's heroes as a songwriter, just as a guy who knew how to capture the human spirit in song. It was just really tough. It was a hard kind of just reality that we're all living into right now. And we know that mourning will look a little bit different, as, you know, we're not necessarily connected to John Prine's family, but we're connected to his words, his work, his art, his expressions of the way he saw the world and the way he tried to make sense of things that resonated with us. You know, I can only imagine that there are, you know, I think about the disciples and the disillusionment that took place around, you know, they really bought into this idea of who Jesus was, or who they thought Jesus was. And the story kind of gets flipped upside down on everyone. And then everybody has to kind of reel and find their footing again. I feel like Nashville's doing that right now. So maybe a fitting time for Maundy Thursday conversation.
I know, Dan, when we were on that prayer call this morning, our teammate had the same sense of sorrow and emotion in his voice. He's just telling the story about Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte meant a lot to his family, and you know, just thinking again about a 13-year-old who's no longer, who had meant so much to so many, who's no longer with us. And there's no. We know that she's in a better place, and thanks be to God for that. But it's still, the loss is a loss for all concerned. Calvin, you got something, brother?
Calvin always forgets to unmute himself.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No. Just processing. You know, I feel like in this moment, I feel like nothing to add other than for everyone who's watching, everyone who's in pain right now, that we're with you and we're praying with you. Sorry, John. I feel like I don't have much more other than to add that in this moment.
That's all right.
There's something powerful about that, Calvin. Just being with.
That's what you were saying the other day, Joel, right? The whole story about you know, or was it the end of last week? We were talking about the incarnational Emmanuel, just being with people, right?
Yeah.
So it's all we got for, you know, in spirit, for the family of Charlotte and John and our friends that are wrestling through these tough times. Joel, any observations from you, friend?
Yeah, I think the heart of the witness, to go back to that, of Jesus, the fact that he came near to us, is, you know, set aside kind of the whole church Christianity, all of that stuff for just a minute, and just let that be enough to chew on, that we are created and somehow mysteriously together in this thing. And maybe you can be with somebody today, just like Jesus. He just wanted to be with his disciples. That always strikes me about the Last Supper. I mean, he could have done a whole lot of things, but he shared a meal with them. And so, again, like Calvin said, we're with you. If you're out there and you're feeling alone, yes, God is with you, but maybe this is the only voice you're hearing that says, like, we're actually standing with you. We prayed for you today. If you want to comment or send us a note, we will pray for you. And you are not alone out there, and we serve a God who's with us. And I think that is the message of Maundy Thursday, that he loves us, he serves us, he makes a way for us, and he's with us. And that's powerful.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And I don't want to steal any opportunity for anybody else to comment. Marisa or Jeff, do you want to say anything?
Well, what's always been interesting to me about that story and Jesus in the garden praying, and his closest friends who, you know, it's like, can't you just pray with me? I'm just asking you to pray with me. And, you know, he's carrying the weight of what he came to do, the purposefulness, the intentionality that he had, knowing that he had to go through, one of the most painful things possible to any human being, and just sort of carrying that and sitting in that, and all you want is just the people close to you to understand maybe just like a little of it and kind of be with you in what might seem to be like the least, I don't know, the thing that demands the least out of them. And I just I think about his posture, and I think about people in our own lives. And there's so many times, when we're going through things, and things are very important to us, we're carrying deep weights, and it might feel like the people around us just are not who we need them to be. Jesus could have done that thing, since he was very human at that time. He could have done that thing and just been like, you know what, forget y'all. Like, I'm going on, y'all, no good. Y'all can't even do that. But his posture of like loving his friends, loving us, understanding that we can only be where we're at, and still sort of staying close, still like giving chances to show up, even in that dark time. I don't know. I just feel like there's got to be something in that for us. Like, Lord, show us that even in some of our darkest moments, when people can't really understand everything that we're feeling, when people can't be with us maybe in the way that we want them to, remind us that you're always with us, that people are still there to be loved and cared for. And we're all sort of where we're at. And there's no, I don't know, we can always be trying for more, but you can love people right where they're at, even if they're not doing what you really wish they would do, or be with you in a way that you really wish they would be.
That's good.
It's a continuing cycle of wow, got a little truck in my background here in the home studio. Oh, I'm gonna go over to somebody else while that baby's moving. You got a word for us before we move on?
Oh, now Jeff's muted.
Yeah. Huh. Jeff, gotcha.
There it is. There it is.
Right.
I think I hit it really quick because I thought I was hearing the noise. Then I forgot to unmute it. Thank you for calling me out, Joel. We should keep like a counter of who mutes the most and who doesn't. I think, I would just love being ministered by you guys and hearing you guys just drop those encouragements. I would just drill down even a little farther on what Joel just mentioned briefly at the end of, there's so much richness at that last meal that I don't think we unpack enough. I'm always so encouraged by the fact that, it's also slightly weird, right? Like Jesus, he was very particular and strategic with these guys, and knowing that they had to go on and continue the mission. They were kind of commissioned to have a mission. And he's got one last night with them, kind of before everything changes. He's got one last night to kind of train them, strategically. And what's fascinating to me is he doesn't get out the whiteboard. They didn't have whiteboards back then, but he didn't get out the, like, let's talk theory, let's talk propitiation, let's talk all these things that theologically are important, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't center the moment there. He centers the moment on a meal to teach them about the biggest event in human history that was about to take place the next day, to infuse it in their bodies and in their minds and in their spirits. He gets out bread and he gets out wine. He gives them a meal. And I just think that's the encouragement I see from there is, a lot of us give a lot of theories. Not many of us give a lot of meals. That again, like what I talked about a couple of days ago, he sits at the table with them. There's a deep relational aspect to that I think this moment in our culture is calling for, that we would sit at people's tables, metaphorically if we have to, right now with the shutdown, and then physically, the minute we're out to go outside of our door again, and not give a bunch of theories all the time. Because here's the truth. I don't think those are mutually exclusive either, by the way. I think the meal is a theory. I think that's what we always forget too. I think sometimes we can conflate the two and realize, no, man, how beautiful is it that Jesus was trying to teach something there. He wasn't trying to just be a hippie, like, let's just have a dinner, He actually said, I actually want to teach the best way to teach you and to commission you out the next day when I go on the cross is this moment where we eat something. It's embodied, it's flesh, it's incarnational. And I just think that's what we need right now for sure.
That's good. I think a practical thing that our listeners and viewers could do is share in that meal together with whoever you're with in your home. Break that bread, drink that wine. If you can bring in others digitally, do it. I mean, it's just such a rich tradition, and that'd be a practical way to put that into play today.
Amen.
So I have a jackhammer, literally a jackhammer about
Hey,
me right now.
that's the podcast life right there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Daily
exactly.
stream,
So,
baby.
one of the most somber moments on our show ever, and then the jackhammer kicks in. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Dan to bring us home.
Pretend that's the Holy Spirit jackhammering our hearts.
All right, this is it's a jackhammer leading us right to Nashville. Well, we, music is always a great way to kind of express the way the world is and the way the world could be. We have a great special guest with us today. Jenn Bostic is here, and Jenn is, I can read a few things about her. She's incredible artist, songwriter, really got her start writing and performing a lot of country music, gospel music, kind of in that space, pop music. And she has just kind of over the years done what a good artist should do, what a good songwriter does, which is just see the world, tell the truth, describe it as it is. And so she's found herself working a lot more in the gospel and Christian music world. She had a really popular song called "Jealous of the Angels" that was about her late father that really connected with a lot of people. And I felt like, wow, it really makes sense that she's on our show with us today, just as we were talking about Maundy Thursday, the idea of grieving and mourning, the idea of loss. But it's great to have her on the show. She's got a new song that's going to release tomorrow. So we get to help her and say, hey, go out and check it out. Go find it on all the various streaming services where you can. But I just want to introduce and welcome Jenn Bostic to the show. How are you, Jenn?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you're here in Nashville also, correct?
Yes, I am. Yes.
You are. How are you holding up?
I am doing all right. It's learning all things online right now, but at the beginning of the travel ban announcements, I was actually on a tour in Europe. And so I am very grateful that I made it home and I am with my husband in Nashville now. So I do have a lot to be thankful for. And I found a lot of peace once I got home. But man, there was some spiritual warfare happening to get me home for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. The airline industry in itself is its own kind of battle. But well, we're so glad to have you with us. We'd love to hear you play some music for us today, and for all the good people that are watching and listening on the podcast. Do you have some songs for us today?
I do. Yes. The conversation has been beautiful. Thank you guys so much for what you're doing and just the encouragement you're bringing. This idea has just been kind of an image that has kept coming to me and giving me peace through this time, of the idea of being a child of God and him really being our father and us being wrapped in his arms. And I feel like that's giving me so much peace. And I know it was being spoken about earlier, kind of that feeling of maybe the people in our lives, here on earth are not there for us in the ways that we maybe thought in the same way with, at the Last Supper, but God is always faithful and he's always right there. And I feel like just that idea of being scooped in his arms is kind of getting me through right now. And it's the new single that comes out, on Good Friday is called Wrapped. And I'm going to share it with you now. I am saved. I am loved. I am wrapped in the arms of God. I don't mind waiting. His kingdom comes. I am wrapped in the arms of love. Here in the waiting, Father, my heart is aching for your voice. Speak to me. I bow before you, Father, here in the midst of all this noise. I receive. I am not alone. I am not alone. You hear me crying. I am not alone. I am not alone.
I am saved. I am loved. I am wrapped in the arms of God. I don't mind waiting. His kingdom comes. I am wrapped in the arms of love. The price of my salvation already has been paid for me faithfully. This light inside keeps shining, no matter how dark it might be. I believe I am not alone. I am not alone. You hear me crying. I am not alone. I am not alone. I am saved. I am loved. I am wrapped in the arms of God. I don't mind waiting. His kingdom comes. I am wrapped in the arms of love. In the arms of love. In the arms of love. Jesus. Jesus. In the arms of love. In the arms of love. Jesus. Jesus. I am not alone. I am not alone. You hear me cry. I am not alone. I am not alone. I am saved. I am loved. I am wrapped in the arms of God. And I don't mind waiting. His kingdom comes. Yeah, I will keep waiting. His kingdom comes.
Amen. So good.
Yeah,
Wow.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
fantastic.
Yes, Lord.
Jackhammer
Yeah.
just killing it here.
Oh, so good.
Awesome.
Nice. They're not done yet, huh? None of that. They're still going to hammer away. I guess that's some solitary art someone can be doing out there. So, Jen, how are you? How has this season been for you? We were talking earlier, and I was mentioning how a lot of people have this sense that because everything has sort of come to a grinding halt, that now the artist community can spend their time just writing songs and being as prolific as possible. And so I have to ask, has that been your experience so far?
Yeah, no pressure. No
Yeah.
pressure, right?
Right.
just write the best songs ever written right now.
Right.
No, it's so interesting. I mean, I think this time to sit and reflect spiritually has been amazing, but there's also, I mean, learning how to do all of this, like, trying to figure out, okay, if everything's going online and I believe God gave me these gifts to share and to comfort and to help people, then I got to figure out how to be online and do all these things. And so it's been really interesting just trying to get creative in connecting in different ways with people, whether to just create community through music, through life, whatever it might be, has just been kind of the main forefront of what I'm trying to do. And yes, I have been writing a little bit, but I've really just been trying to figure all this out and perform when I can and just share these gifts.
Well, it's a hard thing to do. I think everybody's trying to get their footing and figure it all out. I was never really one of those guys that was great at doing. I know there's a lot of songwriters out there that can. They write online. They do the Google Hangouts or Zoom conference calls with other writers, and they write songs together that way. I haven't really done a whole lot of that, and it felt like that would be a little bit difficult. So I don't know if you've been able to ever do much of that. Seems like you tour in Europe a fair amount. As I was looking through stuff, you were the International Touring Artist of the Year from British Country Music for both 2017 and 2018. So I imagine being kind of so out in the world and touring a lot means you kind of have to learn to write when you're in different places and remotely, correct?
Yes, I have done my fair share of trying to write via Skype or just sending lyrical ideas back and forth voice memos and things. But my favorite is still to just sit down at a piano with some other people and, write a song together or by myself. And I think that's, even though I am touring in Europe quite a bit, I kind of try to compartmentalize, like touring season, writing season. So
yeah, well, we wish you the best in that. Do you have another song for us? Would you be willing to play another song?
I do have another song, and I know you were talking about John Prine earlier, and we kind of talked about this briefly backstage. I do know a John Prine song, so I'd love to honor him that way.
Please do. We'd love to hear that.
After my mother, oh man, it's another child that's grown up. It dreams of thunder, lightning was desire. Well, this old house, it would have burned down a long time ago. Make me an angel, flash from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing that I can hold on to. It's believing this living is just a highway to go. Now when I was a young girl, I had me a cowboy. You weren't much to look at, no, he was just a free-random man. That was a long, long time. No matter how hard I tried, the years, they just flow by like a broken down dam. And I sing, make me an angel, flash from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing, Lord, that I can hold on to it. To believe in this living, well, it's just a highway to go. Ooh. Highway, highway. There's flies in the kitchen. I can hear them, they're buzzing. But I ain't done nothing since I woke up today. There's how in the world can a person go to work in the morning and come home in the evening and have nothing to say? I sing, make me an angel, the flames from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing, Lord, that I can hold on to it. To believe in this living, well, it's just a highway to go. To believe in this living, well, it's just a highway to go.
Yeah.
That was
Thank
amazing.
you so much. Thank you so much, Jen. That's awesome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well,
That was a treat. What a treat.
That was fantastic. Good way to finish.
It's only
up
7
today.
a.m. here in Maui, but it's all downhill
There
from
you go.
here now after that. That was pretty
I know.
amazing.
Extraordinary, Jen. Unbelievable. And that happens to be one of our producer Marina's favorite songs too. You
Oh,
killed
look
it.
at that.
You killed it.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shut it down here before the jackhammer drives folks crazy out there. Or drive me crazy.
Good.
I just want to say thank you all for being with us. We look forward to having you back tomorrow. Jenn Bostic, thank you so much. And God bless you all. Keep fighting the good fight until tomorrow now.
All
See
right.
y'all.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.